From the campaign. Alex, good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Can you give me some sense of the campaign you've been covering?
Well, it's very different from campaigns that we're used to. When you look at it, it all looks similar. It all looks like something you've seen before, but in many ways, it's almost like a parody. I mean, there are candidates, so to speak. There are ads all over. There is news coverage, but it's not real. And I'll give you an example of the kind of thing that really hit me. Vladimir Putin had a speech at a rally last week. He was talking about what he would do in the next 6 years if he becomes president. And he started talking about how he would eliminate corruption by going after obnoxious bureaucrats. He'd been there for 12 years in power, and he was talking as if he's a brand new candidate. And it was just completely bizarre. It's very difficult to see that happening somewhere in Canada. The other thing that's also very bizarre is that you have four other opponents, but they never directly criticize him. It's inconceivable to me to watch a Canadian election, let's say Stephen Harper in the last one, that every party in there would just kind of tiptoe about some of the things they didn't like about him.
It seems, too, though, to be a very different kind of campaign for Vladimir Putin, in as much as he's looked sort of like a man who's no longer entirely in control of his own image. What kind of surprises have emerged for him in his campaign?
Well, that he actually has to campaign. That's the thing. I mean, he, in previous, for example, 4 years ago, he didn't have to go to rallies. He didn't have to respond. He just basically stood back. He has these people who are proxies for him, who debate other proxies on television. He writes. In the past, he did nothing. This time around, he's writing, quote unquote, writing articles in various newspapers, promising things. But he has to appear with people in a much greater way now than he was before. And of course, he's been completely caught off guard by all these opposition rallies since the parliamentary elections in 3 months ago.
Putin, though, also seems to be running into something that's slowly appeared in Russia in recent years and is beginning to be a political factor, a middle class, right? One that resents the imperious political elite lording it over everybody and notably racing through red lights with their blue lights flashing. How is that sentiment playing into this campaign?
Well, it's definitely, I would probably qualify the middle class by saying it's the extremely well-educated urban middle class, a subset of a subset, and who knows what the numbers are. It's hard to tell. What it's done is it's created a division, a very obvious polarization, which is not 50-50 by any means, but even if it's 10% on the side against Putin, they're obviously hurt. And I'll give you a couple of examples, which are, I think, very telling. I have been following for the last 16 years of one particular family for the CBC. They're kind of a barometer. When I say barometer, they have tended to be reflecting who is popular. And so they are for Putin. Now, what was interesting, two things. We had a driver who brought us to their house, which is outside St. Petersburg. This guy is a young man who is very much on the opposition side. And he sat there in the house as we were doing the interview and didn't say anything. And then when we left, he said to me, I was shocked because I had never met any people who were sincerely for Putin. And this is a person who lives in Russia, who is probably 25 to 30 years old. And clearly, he associates only with one particular kind of people. That polarization is very, very important. Now, the other thing that was interesting in the interview with them, I asked them what they thought about Alexei Navalny. Now, Alexei Navalny is kind of the unofficial leader of this group that's been protesting against Putin. Everybody in that group, for example, the driver, would know exactly who he is. It's impossible not to know who he is. The family didn't know who he was. They had no idea. They said they could get their news on TV, and that's exactly the problem. Russian state television does not report what the groups who follow news through the internet and other ways get themselves. And you have this incredible gap.
However much Putin may have misjudged the mood of the electorate at this point, analysts still conclude he's running an election that's already been decided on his behalf. Why has no credible political opposition been able to emerge in Russia?
Well, it's hard to say it hasn't emerged. It has certainly emerged among that group of people that I just described. The problem is that it hasn't really been allowed to emerge. I mean, the opposition, not the ones who are essentially stooges in the campaign right now who've been around for a long time who are not really opposing Putin. I'm talking about the communists and Zhirinovsky and a couple of others. But the state media, first of all, don't report what they're doing, so they really don't exist. But the other thing is the process of registering parties and registering candidates is such that it's very easy for people who control it, and they're basically Putin appointees, they can just simply deny. And so a couple of people who were considering running didn't because they couldn't get the 2 million signatures that are needed. One of the people, Grigory Yavlinsky, who's been kind of a member of the opposition for many, many years, did get the 2 million signatures, but he was denied entry on some kind of technicality. The ink wasn't right, or the grammar wasn't right, or the commas weren't right. I'm not exaggerating. That's exactly the kinds of things that are used to deny people entrance. So those leaders exist. They're just not seen.
If, in fact, Mr. Putin is back as president shortly for 6 more years, what should we expect him to do with them? I mean, who in Russia should be confident and who should be getting worried about now?
Well, he should be worried. I mean, it's a country with many, many problems. It's losing its population every year. The men in Russia live to under 60 years old. It's something like 160th in the world in terms of longevity. It's got gigantic numbers of homeless children. The healthcare system is pathetic. I mean, I'll give you one very simple example. My wife has parents in a mid-sized town of Smolensk, and they have friends who have a father who's in the 80s. He had some kind of heart problem. They called an ambulance. The people asked how old he was. They said it was 83 years old. They said, "We're not coming. He's too old." It's not an exception. This is completely normal. If you want to get healthcare, you have to pay, to bribe. And then the biggest problem, which is the one that he says he's going to do something about, is corruption. There's a group called Transparency International, which calculates this. It's 154th out of 178 countries. So the emergence of this middle class that you've been talking about and the educated people, they realize all this, but also the people who are somewhere in the periphery of that also realize it. You cannot continuously ignore these things. And whether or not he survives the 6 years, by the way, is an open question. But those are definitely going to be the challenges, not to mention these rallies that are probably going to continue.
And what of Russia's position on the international stage should Mr. Putin be reelected? He has been aggressively repositioning the country for the past couple of years, and I wonder where you would see him taking it next.
I don't think anything like that is going to change. I mean, for example, in that speech with which I began in the big soccer stadium, he used this war imagery of a very famous Russian poet in which he managed to bring in the possibility of being attacked connected to the war against the French 200 years ago and World War II, as if it's imminent. This kind of external enemy imagery has been used continuously in this country, and not just by Putin, and it's very difficult to see why that would stop. I mean, the jokes about how the State Department pays for everything that is against Putin are nonstop.
Putin, though, has been dismissive of the U.S., the UN, and warming to Asia and China in ways not seen for some time. Where might that go?
Well, I mean, this is a way of balancing. I mean, Russia has, certainly under him, has tried to play off the U.S. by going to the various adversaries that the Americans have. So in that sense, that's not surprising. The Chinese part of this, it's very difficult to see. Russia, one of the things that they often want to do is play Europe off against China because they sell gas and oil. And if there's some kind of opposition to violation of human rights, for example, they're going to say, well, if you don't like it, then we'll just go to China. But logistically speaking, it's very difficult. They don't have the means to transport it. So my suspicion is I don't see any particular changes in the policy on that end.
Alex, good to speak with you. Thanks for coming on.
It's my pleasure.